All right, welcome to another YouTube tutorial. This one will have just a little bit of rambling in the beginning, and then we'll prepare our painting and go through our thought process. Let me move this on the side. First thing is a book that I referenced yesterday. I believe I referenced it yesterday. My Way with Watercolor by Crony. Let's find his full name. Okay, My Way with Watercolor, Three-Value Approach by Claude Crony. So you guys should be able to see it right up there. I got this book off of eBay. It's probably a $4 used book, $3 used book. So if you could find it for that price, I'd recommend it and pick it up. If it's outside that price range, I wouldn't recommend it, mainly because I find that there's just so many valuable books within that price range on eBay that are used, that it's just, there's just so many that you could get in that range that I would go for it. This guy, really talented. Unfortunately, I think he's deceased. This was copyright 1973. So first printing 1973. So I believe he was painting for quite some time at that point. Of course, I really don't know the whole thing with copyright laws with books and whatnot and showing things on YouTube. So I'm not going to flip through the book. However, it is mainly black and white photos, which I think really harkens back onto three-value approach. In earlier videos, I've talked about Carlson's guide to angles, where he would break it down into three values: sky being the lightest, the floor being the second lightest. Maybe he broke it down to four. I'm sorry. Sky being the lightest, floor being the second lightest. Things on angles being the third lightest, because it's going to catch a little bit of that light, and then trees being the darkest. So it was good kind of breakdown, and this is a good breakdown as well. And his has a variety where it's not really technically, I guess, applied to the different areas. It's just the different patterns that could take place with those. So it's mainly black and white, but I think for the most part he is a painter that will stay in a limited range of color values and has a lot of tonal effects. I'll probably be able to just show you guys like one picture from here. Here is a colored plate in it, and it shows a lot of textural effects. Wet and wet. This is probably a brush that has been splayed out. This is, I believe he used a palette knife, but you can use the rigger or and scrape and whatnot. Here it looks like scraping with either a credit card. No, I think he used a palette knife as well. So back then they didn't have the credit cards, or they did, but they just didn't use them to scrape. So he used a palette knife, razor blade scraping, splattering effects. So he really scraping, most likely with a razor blade's edge right up in here. So he used a lot of techniques, and that's what we kind of talk about in these videos, is kind of the value, light, dark, and whatnot. And we also just talk about a lot of textural effects. So if you're looking on eBay and you come across this book, check it out. Like I said, if you get it for $4, I think it'd be, an interesting read. And if not, I mean, you obviously don't have to go out and buy it. Check out Claude Crony if you're interested in his painting style. So that ends our book review, which was kind of impromptu. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. I stayed up kind of late last night. I had taken a nap though later in the evening, went for a bike ride and cleared out the shed yesterday. So just, and mowed as well. So a lot of restless activities, keeping things clean. Of course, this art room is going to be the last thing to get cleaned, and this art desk will be the last thing that gets cleaned, so I apologize. And you guys will be the first to know when that day hits. I might even just do a video of the art desk. So at this point, this is where I'll probably say skip to this point where we start painting and talking about what we're actually going to do. So on the bike ride, went around, took a bunch of pictures, and I realized that I can hook my Kindle up to my computer and download all of those files from my my camera. I just put the big old SD card in, get it on the computer, and then transfer it over to this, and then it's actually staying into the folders that I separated them into. So kind of, next level, good, interesting thing. So this is a photo from yesterday. We kind of had our dreary day, but let me tell you, it was just really nice being out and riding bicycles, regardless of the way the sky looked. Hopefully today we get a chance to do that as well. Even though where I live, they call it a city, and I teach at the inner city school, I would not really consider it. It's more of a town. So it's not like we were bumping into people and all that. So with this, when I was looking at it, when I was flipping through, thinking of what kind of ideas we should do, I thought that maybe we should do a limited palette. And limited palette, I'm thinking that we should do ultramarine. Okay, so we got our ultramarine, burnt umber for the grays in the sky. So we have the blues and the grays, and we can use the browns of it right there. And I'm kind of wanting one more color in this, and I think that one more color is going to be phthalo blue. So we're going to experiment with ultramarine, burnt umber, and phthalo blue. So that's our three things. Reason I'm going with phthalo blue is to darken the burnt umber for these undertones, and we'll see if we can get a green out of it. I know that I would have to add a raw sienna to get more of these greens, but I want to see what we can do with those three colors. So I'm going to put this on the side. Actually, I can lean this back here if it won't slide. Perfect. So much stuff that needs to be cleaned up. All right, so we have our quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. I am going to saturate this paper. It is going to buckle and warp, and we'll use our binder clips to help stretch it taut. And we'll start with the wet and wet. So color wise, I'll just utilize a mixture of the burnt umber. Got so many fuzzies on this. the burnt umber and the ultramarine in the sky. So that's what we'll start out with. I don't know if you hear that in the background, but that's actually the bridge that I took this photo from. It's a drawbridge, and they have the boats pass underneath. I think they're mainly boats that are transporting the rock and limestone and shale and whatnot. So, you know what? Let's put in patches of ultramarine for sky that's going to pop through. We'll get a little bit of our burnt umber. So we're mixing a gray. And that's the cat who is desperately trying to come in here. But I think the moment that I would let it in, it would run away to another room. I'm going to mix a little bit more burnt umber in there. Then let's mix a little bit more ultramarine, just to kind of experiment and see what directions we'd be able to push this as we go more umber, as we go more ultramarine. This just gives a really good gray as well. I'm just not sure why it mixes that gray from it. And that's a mixture I learned from the books of James Fletcher Watson. He has a demonstration for a foggy type sky. It must be a little dry in the house because the paper absorbed a lot. Now, we're going to put in that water from that image. This is the Vermilion River. I'm going to use, that's the water as well. We have a relatively repeated pattern in the sky, so I'm going to try to soften some of these areas up and break some of it up with dabbing. And that repeated effect is most likely due to the paper not being as super saturated as we usually go. I think that's an interesting sky. You could block in areas of ultramarine. Could also take the side of the rigger and put some in there as well. Why the rigger, you ask? Because I don't want to clean the hake right now. Just don't go too intense with the ultramarine. Let's start looking at our tree line and how we're going to approach that house. Chances are we're going to scrape out the house as opposed to actually painting it in. The tree line and the river's edge comes in this fashion. and just blocking in some heights. We're going to go like that. Now we can strengthen this. Since we're doing a lot of wet and wet, remember, concentrate your pigments as you add into these wet areas. Mix that up nice and good. So far we haven't used any phthalo blue, and I had mentioned phthalo blue just to get, you know, like the darker aspects and get some variety in it. Maybe we will push this as far as we can without using phthalo blue, and it'll become just a two-tone experiment. But that remains to be determined. I need to have variation in this texture so that it'll help get the idea of trees versus water reflections. Okay, more pure ultramarine, more burnt umber, we have a very interesting tree that comes up in the background, and I think that's what drove me to taking this photograph initially, and I think that will play an interesting, important part in the kind of weight distribution of this painting. Looking at this, we have some more textural light and darks over this water. We're now going to go back and forth and alternate between scraping and putting the rigger in for darks. We're going to add variety in this tree line. So this is kind of going to be like yesterday's tree line. We could also dab for texture. I feel like we will have to put a second layer on top of this one to get our darks to really take place. And we'll see where we're at with scraping. Okay, so scraping is just going to give us a dark line right now. So let's switch over to the rigger. And just vary the paths and the patterns that you create. Let's come back into these trees. Here's more, even more concentration. That's more on the blue side, so let's see if we get more on the brown. Let's just see umber, burnt umber in there. Now, one thing with this, we've talked about like wanting to do things about composition, and we see how it's like kind of being heavier on this side. In the image, there's actually a little tree growth shoreline right here jutting out. So I'm actually not going to omit that. I'm going to put that in to help balance everything and give us some weight on this side. Because that curves around and we'll have it pass behind this object. I don't really want to put that in just yet. I'm just showing that it's going to happen. Okay, so let's see what type of scraping we could have. Let's see if I have a big enough card for that building. So I'm using the flat. Yep. Come straight down. Get the other side of this house. Not the most elegant scraping. A master of scraping with the card is Stephen Cronin. So if you haven't watched his videos, check him out. Joe Menza does it with, I think he uses it for his mountains, the scraping aspect. There we go. I'm gonna have to apply more pressure so I get more of a surface area with it, and that will do a wider channel and less. And see how like a thin light pressure will backfill. So that's what we're doing right there. This is going to come over with the rigger, but this is that grouping that I showed you over here and how that's going to help us balance things out. Okay, so things are starting to come together. I'm pretty much committed to just making this a 2-color painting. The Burnt Umber and the Ultramarine. So from those two, I'm trying to mix my dark. And I really want to put my darks in at the base, at the undergrowth of these. You can take darks. This is another example, I guess, of I guess it's the counter change. It's also the concept of that light area versus the dark area to draw interest to it. Could start like putting a little ideas of that house in the shapes and little windows. I don't think I'm going to go too much detail with it. Now here, there's a thing called a maul that I do not have, and what it lets you do is it's a long ruler. You can put it on the edge of your table and you can put your hand on top and that'll help steady it. So I'm using the Hake brush itself off the edge of the paper to do this. So you could buy one. They have like kind of leather wrapped ends. I think they're mainly used, like a lot of oil painters will use them for their thin lines and specific points. But within watercolor seems to help like in moments like this. Texture this up a little bit, make it tree growth around this. The house is almost entirely enveloped though, so I may need to push that back. We do have these houses here. Here's this one that I had talked about being a very interesting element. Even though it's moving water, if we want a reflection of the house in the water, we can try scraping right there. Might be a little too dry. I think I'm going to change the edge of this house like that. Bring that side in. Unfortunately, it looks a little ramshackled as the lines aren't the best with it. This angle should probably have come down more. Okay. Let's add some variety. growth to balance everything out. This is the side of the rigger into our mixture. That helps weigh this side out. You can build this up as dense or not. Okay, we can now let's see, let me give her a round brush. I'm gonna grab that guy. I use the round brush for splattering. I have been able to splatter with the hake and I have been able to splatter with the rigger, but I think this is just the most convenient. And a little tap, tap, tap. And that'll put texture on there for us. Now the interesting thing is, and this is a side note about me, I think I told you I've been doing allergy shots and all that, and a lot of sinus infections and whatnot. Well, there's something they haven't done, like a CAT scan yet, because I'm doing the allergy treatments and taking the medicine and whatnot. But I originally went because I was having we'd go to pep rallies at the school. And I would have ear pain from the loud noise, which I think anybody would. And it would sound like my ears were underwater. And this is from years, and I thought, that I had done damage to my ears listening to loud music, headphones, and all that. And I kind of just wrote it off as, okay, this is the way life is. And then it was getting worse. I realized that it's most likely allergy and sinus related. Like things backing up into like a clogging in the nose area and causing, I guess, fluids in the ears, like the eustachian tube. And that tapping alone right there caused that ear pain and that ear sensation. So that's a little weird. That's just something about me. I could also just be a hypochondriac. And I'm not making light of people that have that affliction. Just I'm saying could be the case. So here's our water. Darken that up. We could probably scrape out some reflections and ideas. So we haven't done any dry offs. You could scrape in rocks here too. Maybe that's what I need to do to make this more entertaining in this spot. Just add that textural effect. This is using the card lightly, pushing things around. I feel like there's not much more I can do on this one, so we'll do a dry off. We'll take a look, maybe put some more dimension into this, if I can have it happen. Okay, dry off time. Let's take the razor and see what type of textures we can get. This is laying it flat and just would be a good way, I think, for to catch the sun on the edge of like a far distant foliage. I think that's an interesting use as well of the razor. Let's see if we can get some of those narrow cuts we did last time. You could also use the razor blade. This is something Joe Menza had mentioned. You could use the razor blade for water texture, so do that as well. I think we did quite a bit. Oh, hey, we have somebody in the chat. Beautiful Monday blown mind. Never knew you could do that. I don't know if you're still in the group chat, but what technique are you referring to? Like the razor blade, or um, what did you know that you could never do? Oh, hello. Yeah. So for the people that watch me on YouTube, and I've mentioned this before, I live stream these videos on a platform called Twitch. And those of you that are watching on Twitch, here's my YouTube, Andrew Broussard Watercolors. If you ever want to check that out, Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Oh yeah, so they were asking about the blow dryer. Yeah, blow drying effects. It's really useful with the fast and loose painting in order for you to go from stage to stage. However, with a blow dryer, when you're doing wet and wet, you want to be aware of how things are going to push around on the page and the color shift that's going to take place, then the tonal shift. So sometimes you want to put the blow dry on a low setting so you're not pushing the paint around, or you could hold the blow dryer up higher and do the overall. If the paper is super saturated with water, you're going to push those puddles around, and one area might dry before another, and you'll get a hard dried edge. So you want to be careful with that as well. So now that there's somebody watching real time, yeah, intentional color meshing, yeah. With the wet and wet, you get a lot of that blending techniques up in the sky. I don't know if you were here in the beginning. We did wet and wet with ultramarine, a ultramarine burnt umber mix on the more pushed ultramarine side, and then this was more burnt umber push for those as well. Let's see, since we actually have somebody in the chat, and I am enjoying somebody in real time communicating during painting, I will mix a little bit more. And I don't know if you were here from the beginning, but this painting is just 2 colors. This is just an experiment with Burnt Umber and Ultramarine, and seeing what we can achieve with it, as well as practicing our different textural effects. So we had the splattering, we had scraping with the card, we have the textural effects of the brush, so the painterly effect. We also had the razor blade. We had blotting with paper towel. So kind of like monochromatic or two-tone really does benefit a lot from different textures. And yeah. So it's kind of somebody interesting having somebody there live. Okay, cool. So we also talk a lot about layers, and since we did the dry off and we're kind of continue playing around, we can layer tree trunks over our scratched out tree trunks, and we can go back and forth. I was talking to somebody about the razor blade scraping, how we both have difficulty painting over those actual areas. I don't know if it's because the paper is so damaged in that spot, but I think we kind of came to the conclusion to use that technique near the very end. So like if I wanted to dry brush over this, it fills in some. We could add more weight on this side, bring this up even higher. But then this, yeah, it kind of balances out this guy. I don't like how cross that is, so let's bring this up even higher. And we'll feed in darker in the bottom left. About here will be covered up with the matte. It's more pure burnt umber. Let's splatter on top of that and dry off, and then we'll call it. You can splatter into wet and wet areas, and that'll give a different type of splattered texture due to its diffusion. Also in wet and wet, you can use salt. I think some people even put sand in those spots as well. All right, let's dry this off and we'll sign it and we'll see what it looks like underneath the mat. Okay, so next time we experiment with this this duo, because I've used this duo a lot within a painting, we are going to do this was our burnt umber plus ultramarine, but we want to experiment with maybe phthalo blue or indithron blue, or maybe even just Payne's gray or a black to see what kind of darks we can get. Okay, so here it is underneath the mat. Let me sign it and then I'll move the camera and then I will sign off. So let's sign it right down here. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will be back later on this evening with more painting. Have a great day.